the being on Twitter, not wearing the old shoes, all of these things, like it's saying like the papacy, it needs to be more of a normal institution and down to earth. Popes retiring, if it becomes this kind of serial thing.
Here we go. Welcome to a special edition of the Focusing Way podcast. I'm your host, David Battistella. We call these special editions The Way is Love. Find The Focusing Way on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and our website, thefocusingway.com. Saint Gallen Mafia, Exposing the Secret Reformist Group Within the Church, is the title of an intriguing, challenging, and thought-provoking book by Julia Meloni. She meticulously pieces together documented events and writings surrounding power struggles within the Roman Catholic Church, leading up to and after the death of Saint Pope John Paul II. You know, there's a lot of talk about Vatican II and the Second Council and what that's done and what that's paved the way for a new church or the church or whatever the church is supposed to be. It's again connected to Fatima because the third secret was to be revealed before 1960, and it's precisely after that doesn't happen that the church takes this other direction at the Second Vatican Council. But do you think what has happened from the 60s to the late 90s or even to the present day within the Catholic Church sort of a precursor for modern cancel culture?
I think that a lot of what is happening in the church is kind of in lockstep with what happens in the world, basically, because the idea was to try to, the idea of these men in the Saint Gall Mafia was to get the church to swim in the same waters as the world. And of course, if the church is if the church isn't fulfilling her mission, or she's introducing certain dangerous practices and or not men in the church, let me specify that, men in the church, if they're doing that, then absolutely there's not this kind of model for the rest of the world. Now, in terms of cancel culture, like when you say that phrase, like the thing that immediately comes to mind is there's a part in the book where I talk about Benedict XVI and how he had said, different things about I can't remember the exact year, but he had done like a trip to Africa, and he had said that basically that people needed to live the church's teachings on sexuality in order, like that was the solution to the AIDS crisis, not condoms and stuff. And there was just such a wave of canceling from the media and the outside world and that sort of thing. But before that, the interesting thing was Daniels and some of these men from the mafia had been talking about, they had been trying to like change the idea, the church's teachings on condoms. So in a way you could say like their statements were constantly like preemptively in a way trying to cancel Benedict, or after his election, their statements were trying to cancel what he had already done, or preemptively cancel what he was going to do, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of an interesting phenomenon for me to think about how all of the attacks in Benedict's direction, they came from many places, but in a lot of ways, publicly, they came from the mafia.
Yeah, and I'm just going to read another bit that really struck me, and it goes back to your point a little bit earlier about sanctity. But so from the book, at the conclave, Murphy O'Connor continued, you have the official meetings of all the cardinals, but then outside, you meet secretly with the cardinals at dinners behind closed doors and discuss these candidates. So by the time you actually go into a conclave, there's already a number of votes for a particular person. And, as I read the book, and you can call me naive or whatever, but when I think about the conclave, I think about it as the sacred nature of it, and where the Holy Spirit is the deciding factor. And the reason they close the doors is that they are being asked to be moved by the Holy Spirit to move the hearts of these cardinals to elect or present who will sit in the chair of Peter. And your book sort of destroyed that as a romantic notion for me. But what is your feeling on that? Did you experience any of that as you were coming up with these discoveries?
Yeah, I had a number of kind of romantic notions about the conclave issue as well. I just remember, for instance, when Benedict, it was easy for me, to say, when Benedict was elected, I was so relieved and overjoyed, and it was easy for me to say, okay, that's God's will, that's the Holy Spirit. And then I remember when the abdication of Benedict came, I was confused and sad and numb, but I just thought, well, it's definitely it must be for the best. I'm not going to think about it anymore. It must be for the best. And then when the next conclave happened, electing Pope Francis, I just remember, again, thinking whoever comes out of there, like, that's the Holy Spirit's pick. That's God's will. That's I'm going to, completely throw my confidence and just kind of hang off of every word that new pope says. And that was kind of how I did. I've talked about this in other places. Basically, for the first at least 3 years of Pope Francis's pontificate, I just was completely in admiration of everything that he said, everything in his homilies, everything like that. When I started writing for Crisis Magazine, and then when I started writing the book, I did learn that was when I learned about all the maneuverings that do happen in a conclave. And some maneuverings are just kind of normal and necessary, and some maneuverings kind of, make you feel a little disillusioned with some of the process. The Saint Gall Mafia, these men, they were, it's interesting, like, they were holding a meeting the day before the conclave, the night before the conclave. Alumni of the Saint Gall Mafia and other people were doing this before the 2013 conclave, and they did a tally of how many votes Bergoglio had, and they counted 25. And then the next day at the conclave, the first round, Bergoglio gets, I believe, 26. So I mean, they had it absolutely
Yeah.
perfect, almost perfectly planned,
Wow.
and everything. So that it's very, very eye opening.
We're living in this era of sort of papacy by tweet, and social media and media probably has had greater influence than ever over the church and the papacy itself. And the papacy has to react to things in this modern environment. And I guess I just want to talk about a little bit. I want to ask you about, like, traditionally, the speed with which the Catholic Church has moved has been sort of painstakingly slow. But how is this new era of information used, and how is it a good or a bad thing when it comes to how rapidly the church has been moving in a new direction in recent years?
Yeah, that's an important observation, because I think that that affinity for slowness, it certainly helps you preserve the past, preserve tradition, that sort of thing. I think it's again a symptom of trying to keep up with the world, trying to mirror what the world is doing, and the things you mentioned, like the papacy by tweet, that just perfectly encapsulates again, this just this idea that we need to copy what's going on in the world rather than be something set off. And one of the things that interested me in the book was Confession of a Cardinal and a number of other places, and other figures as well who were kind of mentors to the not formally mentors, but maybe associated with some of the mafia members. They all talked about like demythologizing the papacy and bringing the papacy down to earth. So don't have the Pope wear anything fancy, set us apart from others. You think about the way that Pope Francis, when he was elected, he immediately knew, like, he didn't want to wear the red shoes of the with the which is the color of the martyr's blood, but he just wanted to not wear them. And I mean, these may seem like insignificant decisions, but symbolically, the being on Twitter, not wearing the old shoes, all of these things, like, it's saying like the papacy, it needs to be more of a normal institution and down to earth. Popes retiring, if it becomes this kind of serial thing, again, it leads to this idea you're just like a CEO of a corporation or something.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, all very connected.
Even in his abdication, Pope Benedict XVI speaks about being a contemplative and allowing this other papacy to be the administrative type of. It's even right in his letter of abdication. Catholicism, as we're speaking, it's produced sort of hardliners over the years, or perceived hardliners, also more liberal-minded men, like, you're talking about Cardinal Martini a lot in this conversation. But how do you describe how broad the faith really is when it can produce or attract such extreme positions? And then, like, it's allowing us to have that conversation, right, in a way. But I just wanted to see if you had a thought on that.
Yeah, I think when I think of the men of the Saint Gallen Mafia. I think that they wanted a kind of big tent Catholicism, and some of their ideas are basically, there's the idea of synodality, or basically, like, if we could have different, for instance, different synods for different parts of the world, and then one area can decide that they want the ordination of married men, and then this other area they could decide that we're not ready to go to that level yet. They use this image of a polyhedron, where it's like a lot of different sides, and they're all nominally united. I think that what's interesting about that image, the polyhedron, the Italian Vaticanista Sandro Magister, he says that, well, if we translate that into plainer terms, really it means in pieces. That really what the polyhedron stands for is a church shattered into pieces. And so, there are certain things that, like, legitimately can be different, in Catholicism, and you can stay united. But I think these men, they wanted something very, very, like, broken, like something where Casper in Germany could have his communion for the divorced and remarried proposal, and people can try other things. Basically, they don't want the Pope to be a centralizer who controls things and unifies things. They didn't want the Pope playing that role anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah.
If it just goes to one holy apostolic. I mean, it's right inside the creeds. It's in the catechism. It's just ingrained in everything it means to be a Roman Catholic. So, part one of your book so beautifully lays out all the planning, how these people gathered to sort of plan for a papacy that they wanted to see. And then part two takes a look at that being implemented. If I don't want to oversimplify it, but really just since Pope Benedict's abdication in 2013, just how much has the Catholic Church changed?
Yeah, in terms of I guess to take the pacing point, to start with that, Roberto de Mattei, the historian, has talked about how in a lot of revolutions, there's this long simmering kind of planning period or preparatory period, and then things kind of explode, and then they go very quickly. I think that there had been just basically a very long, I try to show this in the book, like there had been a very long preparatory period. And then before Pope Francis is elected, before the conclave, you have men like Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor of the Saint Gallen Mafia saying 4 years of Bergoglio would be enough to change things. So 4 years to kind of, just undo what Benedict had done, undo other things that had happened. It's a very fast pace that I think they were hoping to work with. And the Synod on the Family, that was where there was the fight, over the Casper proposal for communion for the divorced and civilly remarried. And as I mentioned before, this was kind of, this was Casper's This was Casper's great project, but it was also Martini's great hope. I talk in the book a lot about how Martini wanted this proposal, and before he died, those were kind of like part of his, last words in his last testament. Now, there was that period in the Synod on the Family when the interim report, the midterm report, was read, and it was, the one that was just kind of opening up the door to the Casper proposal and more. And it was like an earthquake. That was the way people were describing it in the media. And it was huge. And then I think they realized at that point after that, because they had a lot of pushback from, there were different conservative cardinals, for instance, who were pushing back against it. There's a report that some of the cardinals even went to Benedict after that and asked him to intervene. So I think Pope Francis, I think one of the most important things to think about with him and to know about him is that he loves this idea that time is greater than space. And the idea is, you don't have to immediately get a proposal that dominates all the different spaces, so to speak. You can incrementally introduce it into different places and stuff. So I think after that, they knew that they had to go at a slower pace, or they had to get the Casper proposal to work in some places and not others. The next synod was the Amazon Synod, and the big conversation was the ordination of married men. This was a big Saint Gallen topic as well. And then, of course, we had Benedict writing a book with Cardinal Sarah defending celibacy. And then when Pope Francis's Currida Amazonia came out, he just bracketed the issue. I mean, there's some language in there that suggests an eventual opening to the possibility of the ordination of married men, but he didn't. A lot of people were saying that he was probably going to legislate that with Currida Amazonia, and he had to go slower again. He had to step back. But the issue with, if I can mention just one more thing, the Latin Mass, though. Of course, Benedict did Summorum Pontificum, just kind of liberalizing and spreading opportunities for people priests to say the traditional Latin Mass. And that was something that obviously the Saint Gallen Mafia, different members had spoken out against. And now, of course, we're seeing some of that that war against the Latin Mass play out under Pope Francis's pontificate. But again, it's incremental. It's very, in some ways, very draconian in different ways. But it's still, he's still going by in a very tactical way, I would say.
Yeah, some of what I read was heartbreaking. I'm just going to read a little bit here. As early as 1978, Ratzinger had spoken of how Pope Paul VI had, quote, struggled intensely with the notion of retiring, unquote. Quote, we can imagine how heavily it must burden the mind, no longer to have a private moment, said Ratzinger then. Quote, to be riveted to the end while one's body gives out to a task that demands day after day the full and vigorous exercise of all of a man's strength. Close quote. As I read that, I thought, these were words from a man who, as the vicar of Christ, has to represent the Son of Man who died on the cross and took on all that suffering for us and is taking on a pontificate for life. And then I realized this was also all a sort of foreshadowing.
Yeah.
And it's almost as though you describe a scene in the book where in the last vote prior to, at the Conclave electing Pope Benedict XVI, there's a moment where he's taken by the arm, and I think it was Martini who had sort of presented, possibly, nobody knows what really was said in that conversation. But there was almost a knowing that he had held this position, that he had this, that Cardinal Ratzinger had this thought anyway, that he could be the person who would actually abdicate a papacy, because he had written about seeing the suffering of previous popes. I don't know if that's pulling too much into it, but was there kind of a foreshadowing? Do they work like this mafia? Does it work so quietly and in the shadows that it would consider? Do you think it would consider something like that? Stay tuned for part 3. You've been listening to author Julia Meloni. Her book, Saint Gallen Mafia, Exposing the Secret Reformist Group Within the Church. Check us out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, our website, thefocusingway.com.